So the next uh, repetition structure that we do have to pay attention to here is finally back at 5.1, the do-while structure. So this is page 55 if you're following along with the text. Just a reminder here, the do-while should look a little bit familiar. You actually saw way back in chapter 2 the do-while construct. It was what we used in chapter 2 to just kind of say, hey, look, down the road we'll be able to do repeat, repeat, repeat on things. But for the time being, just trust us that it's coming around. So here is the payback to this. This is the other side. The do while repetition is probably one of the more common ones you're going to use. There are a couple of things to note here about the do while that are going to be important. First and foremost, this is what is known as a leading decision loop. Again, this is on page 55. That means the condition is tested before you enter the loop. And we're going to get into why that is and why that's important in a moment here, but that's one thing to keep in mind. So the testing at the beginning of the loop. Here, again, I believe this is on page 55. We can see what this looks like, the do while loop. Again, do while, all caps, and end do. Those are the keywords that we have here to keep in mind. And you know, the typical things here also apply, that do while and end do are going to be on the same vertical line, and that's going to help keep things nice and tidy. And again, just as a reminder slash a prodding to make your life a little bit easier while you are coding these out for homework, do go ahead and grab a copy of Sublime Text. When you have an indent, so for example, the first line here of your do while, Sublime Text is actually going to remember the tab indent there and keep everything inside of that for you. So it's just going to keep things a little bit more tidy, and it's going to help you kind of manage and maintain how to keep the proper indentation for everything moving forward. So what happens when you set up a do while loop? The following happens. It's really these four things to keep in mind. Number one, the very first thing is the logic of P, that's your condition, whatever that is tested. So as you come in through the very, very first line here of your do while, what happens is your condition is tested. So if your logic is do while student age is greater than 18, so we don't have to get parents' permission for things, that is checked before you enter into the loop. If we are looking for buying alcohol or cigarettes, right? So it is do while age is greater than or equal to 21, because that gets us to the legal age for buying alcohol or tobacco. If we are looking for sending mailers to students who have greater than 60 credit hours, we could say do while student credit hours greater than or equal to 60, and that way P is that condition and it's tested before we get into the loop. Next thing to notice is once we have tested that condition, so this is number two, if and only if P is found to be true, then you go into that do while loop and continue to process whatever the logic is there. At the end of the statement, so what happens is you are inside of your loop here, right? So this is your loop. As your statement block goes down, 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 down through the loop. Sooner or later, you're going to get to the end of that statement block. And what's going to happen is you're going to be returned here to the very first line in your do while loop. At that time, you are going to essentially reevaluate what happens with that statement. Is that statement still true? At some point in time, what we really want to have happen is in order to leave this statement block, we sooner or later want that condition not to be true. So sooner or later, I want to find a student who has less than 60 hours so I can break out of a file operation. When I'm looking at customers who are looking to buy alcohol and tobacco, sooner or later I want to find somebody who is less than 21 years of age so that we can break out of that particular looping statement. As long as it's true, you're stuck inside of this statement that goes top to bottom here, and then it comes back up here. If you never get out of there, that is what is known as an infinite loop. And this is something that you have to actually code to avoid happening. In an infinite loop, what happens is you are never creating a condition where you can remove yourself from that statement block. Those do happen. Depending on the kind of system you're in, that can have a pretty tremendous impact. If you're waiting for another process, so you're just looking to get student data and then you're looking to continue on. Well, if you're stuck in that loop forever, whatever the processes are that happen after that statement block, so if I've got stuff that's supposed to happen down here and I've got more code to consider down there, it's never going to execute because we are stuck inside of that infinite block. So that's not necessarily something we want to see happen there. So we need to have a condition that gets us out of that loop. Finally, what happens is when the statement is found to be false, we can finally exit out of that loop. What happens when you exit out of that loop is what is known as flow of control. We have been executing from inside of this do while to the top again of this do while, and when we have found that condition to be false, we finally come to whatever the next lines of code that happen down here are. So that is kind of the process that happens here inside of a do while loop. The condition for entry and the condition for exit into this loop are tested at the very top of your loop. So right here at the do while statement. Next, your statement block is executed, and this block is executed as many times as is necessary until the do while statement is finally evaluated as false. So when condition finally evaluates false, whatever that is, end of file, or temperature outside of range, or any one of a number of conditions that can be evaluated sooner or later as false. When that finally happens, you can leave that particular decision loop. So we are going to go through an example of how to use a do while loop, how to exit at will out of a do while loop, and different ways of evaluating files inside of a do while loop with our Sublime Text examples coming up next.